Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? It's Dakota Richmond here, and today we're going to talk about what I did this KVK, which was I basically sold a fort 3 times my size. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you what I did in order to be able to take a fort on my own, and how you yourself can actually try doing something like this as well. Now, the strategy here is pretty simple, and it just relates to how formations operate in the game. I'll have an end screen at the end of the video if you want to check that out and learn a little bit more. But basically, the first thing we have to do is figure out what formation the fort is currently in. Meaning that the person that is in charge, whether or not they have their leader in it or not, is really not important. But rather, what formation they're in. And the only way we can do this is we have to dummy test it. Now, in order to dummy test, you can do like a couple thousand units, send it and see which units are decreased more than others, and that's going to tell you real quickly. So like if, let's say I used infantry, and I sent like 1,000 infantry at the front line, and then I see, okay, it goes down by a few tick marks, and then I send 1,000 cav, and it goes down a few more tick marks. Well, that's probably a sign that it's more than likely, an infantry phalanx. Right, because what we're looking for is a determined drop. Now, in my case, I just went ahead and said, all right, let's send 1,000 siege. Now, why? Because it tends to be that if you send at least like a few hundred siege, a few thousand siege, you can kind of avoid losing your leader. And the fact that the siege is on the back, you can kind of avoid it. But the main thing is that when we smack the wall, there's a 50-50 chance of losing your leader when we do this. It's very dangerous. Because, again, if you're going to hit that fort, there's a 50% chance of losing your leader if you're, way over occupancy. And then there's also the problem of if the person's online and is in control of that fort, then they can counter. Now, of course, in order to be able for us to knock this fort out on our own with only 375,000 troops, because if you're wondering how do we do that, you need a 50% army size boost, right? But once you've applied that, you're going to be working with 375,000 troops. Now, the way I did this is I took 60% of 375,000 troops, and that is the minimum threshold of tier 4 that I need in order to not take any reds. 40% of this I'm going to use as tier 2, or in this case, it's approximately 225,000 tier 4 to that of the remainder being tier 2. Okay, now if you had 250k, then that would be 150,000 tier 4, right, without the 50% army boost, and you would do the remainder with tier 2. Now the thing is I obviously, for whenever you're taking on a fort 3 times your size, the more you have is obviously better. This is why people rally forts and they don't solo forts. But hey, I thought, this isn't something that most people do, and I'm sure you're probably wondering, well, how do I do it? So, as I was explaining to you earlier, the main thing is that we have to figure out what the formation is. So, once we determine what that formation is, the only thing really you need to do is counter it. So, if it's an infantry phalanx, the next step is to go cav phalanx. And the idea is pretty simple. Cav beats inf, and therefore cavalry is always going to come out on top. So you just rinse and repeat until that front line falls. What happens when the front line falls? Well, then you need to know the order in which those unit types come in. So if it's inf, cav, then range, then the most logical thing you need to do once the infantry front line is gone is send range to counter the cavalry. Because the formations read right to left, not left to right. And that is the way you have to be able to, in order to be able to counter effectively, you have to know this. Okay, so this is why with wedges, which again, if you want to check out the formation video, you're more than happy to at the end of the video, but you need to understand that whenever you're going after that particular front line and it disappears, obviously, yeah, there's a chance that it might burn. But if it doesn't burn, then you need to hit what comes up next, which in this case was cavalry, so I went ahead and sent range at it, and that was able to knock it down. And that will essentially let you be able to knock down a fort without really too much trouble. Now, of course, if you're curious, well, how do you avoid, if the guy's online and he's sending, or he's getting reinforced, how do you prevent that? How do you take a fort when that's happening? And the answer to that is that you really don't. But what I've noticed, and this is something that I picked up from Battle Royale, which was that Chinyi, right? He's like a couple billion might. the guy's sending 375,000 tier 4. And because he's got so much tier 4, he's able to send 375 pure tier 4 without really too much thought. He doesn't really bother putting buffer in. And all he does is send one unit type consistently over and over and over again. And even without his leader, 375,000 pure tier 4, if it's in counter, is always going to consistently chip away at that front line until eventually that front line falls. Now, what's interesting to me is that, you know, during the Battle Royale, Baron, or any fort for that matter, they're actually fundamentally flawed in the sense that if you have one person sending range, another one sending cav, and another one sending imp, in theory, as long as that thing isn't being consistently reinforced, you can actually chip away at it until eventually it will actually drop. The reason why that is because if that front line is getting countered, it will eventually lose. And it doesn't matter if there's like 500,000 units of counter back there, because the front line's always getting hit by a counter and it's always going to lose because of this. Now, that same mechanic can then be applied to like players, you know, so like I was showing you how to solo 4 million troops earlier, and I'll have a end screen for that as well at the end of the video if you want to check that out. And the point I'm trying to make here is that if you know the formation in which someone is in, as long as they stay in that formation, it's actually surprisingly very easy to chip away at somebody like that. Even if, let's say, he had like 3 million pure range in there, if I sent 375k infantry and just chipped at it like that, there's nothing to counter it, so it'll actually drop the range in there like consistently fast. It will drop like a rock really, really quick. And I've been telling people about this for a while now, that like don't be scared about how big the number is. Okay, the mechanic will always be in favor for you. Like if you are sending infantry and the guy has range, he's not gonna win. He might be able to put most of your troops in wounds, he might be able to kill some, but most of the time you're gonna be able to chip out more than they can. The problem with forts is obviously, as long as they can consistently reinforce it, then you're going to be chipping against everybody else that keeps chipping back in, which is a lot harder to do, especially if you're starting out. And so this is something that is more of a late game thing, and really for only a handful of players out there that are willing to just go ahead and go at it and YOLO it, you know. But I point this out to you guys because it's something that fundamentally I feel like some people are just not aware of, and so I thought I'd go ahead and share some insight on this to kind of help you guys out. And of course, you know, traps out there, if you guys are trapping, you know, this is something really important you need to know, because if you're going to be holding forts in the future, you need to know that the one reason why a lot of people fall in forts is that you need to know your formations. And I really think that this is something that, yeah, I can really easily tell when somebody doesn't know what they're doing, when somebody sends infantry at cavalry, you know, and it might be a cav wedge, for example, and they go, well, what am I supposed to send at a cav wedge when the guy's sending a range and infantry in it and he's in cav wedge? What? Like, my brain quits working. And that's why I totally recommend checking out my formation video at the end screen and to get yourself a little bit more familiar with it, because if you know what is in the front line, you'll actually start to understand this a little bit better. And I'll see you guys to the next video.